I'm State Secretary for the Minister of Digitalization in Norway, Nikolai Astrup, who was appointed in January in a reorganization of our government to get the digital issues more around the table and to the core of what we're doing. And I thought I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on that and why is it that the digital issues are sort of very quickly moving up on the strategic agendas and becoming issues not only for the technologists in the IT departments, but for boards and CEOs and for top-level management. And the normal way we often approach technological issues is to sort of define a problem and see how can we get the technology to help us do things a little bit more quickly and a little bit more efficient than previously. But since politicians and top-level management don't actually understand what it's about, we leave it to the technologists to find out what we are doing. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that technology is becoming so important for some of the biggest issues we have around. I mean, we're the biggest issue of all, perhaps, climate change. How are we going to leave the planet in a better condition to the next generation than when we took over? It's always been the case that we've improved things and done things better. Now we're asking the question, are we now going in the wrong direction in an irreversible way so that things in a way are going downhill? And what do we do about that? Well, one of the ways to approach this, of course, is to ask the question, can technology help us solve these problems? Is technology there to use resources more efficiently? Can we, by a combination of political decisions, business decisions, and technological knowledge, do things in a better way than we have done before and overcome these challenges? That's not the only challenge. I mean, many of you would know that Norway is a big oil and gas country, and a lot of our revenues to the public sector, both the government and the local government, comes from a sector that pays 78% taxes from their profits. Now, a lot of businesses are saying at the moment that we can be the new oil, we can fill the space, but none of them are saying that we want to pay 78% taxes. So we need a lot of new businesses, business models, creative ideas, ways of doing things to fill the gap in the time that comes. Our population is getting older. I mean, that's a good thing that people live longer and are healthier. But it means that the demography means also that the public sector will have to spend more money in years to come, because we will have to increase spending both on healthcare and care for the elderly, and so on. There are big challenges there, and technology is moving up as one of the most important tools. Not because it necessarily is the most important thing in itself, because it's the answer to a lot of the questions we have to answer in better ways. And then, of course, some people say, and I sometimes say it, that technology is not the most important thing. It's about management, it's about culture, it's about change. And it is. It's about doing a lot of the things that we've been doing previously too. But the sort of convergence at the moment of different technologies that are increasing the pace of change is so great that even the people who make the strategic decisions have to understand much more about technology than they did previously. I mean, the exponential growth with Moore's law, processing power, business models in the cloud with cloud computing. 5G is an important thing at the moment in our context. We're moving from 4G to 5G. 5G data traffic is about 10 to 15 times greater than in the 4G networks. Not necessarily because we're going to speak 15 times more quickly in the telephone than we did previously. I think a lot of us speak as quickly as we can, but because they're not telephones anymore. They are big, high-performance computers, higher performance than the old, big, huge data centers had in businesses. and they're going to be connected. The network is going to be connected to sensors, to the Internet of Things, to a lot of real-time systems. We're going to process a lot more data than we have previously, use it for robotics, and even use in a lot of areas artificial intelligence. I mean, if someone had told me 6 years ago when I joined the government system here in Norway that we were going to make a national strategy on artificial intelligence, I would probably have laughed at that. But now we're doing exactly that because we're confronted with questions, dilemmas. We have to discuss how do we build the competence we need in that area. And all these things that are working together and increasing the pace of change need us to focus more on these issues. Change is, a lot of industries have said that change is a normal thing all the time and has been for a long time, but also the businesses and the public sector, where change perhaps hasn't happened that rapidly, are changing in ways that we didn't dream of even a few years ago. That means we need new competencies, we need to become better at innovation, and we need better digitalization strategies. We need politicians who are able to see, and this is literally seeing, this is the kind of genre that's about politicians looking at things. This is our Prime Minister looking into a microscope. This is the Minister of Digitalization, my boss, Nikolai Astrup, using VR to see. I don't know exactly, and that's one of the problems with this kind of pictures on VR. They look very funny, but you don't always know exactly what's going on. Yes, understanding what technology can do, where it can be used, what kind of results we can achieve, not because we will be the experts, but because we have to provide a framework where it's possible to do more and do better things in a lot of areas. I think a lot of people, when they think about VR, think about it as a kind of gaming technology and a move into sort of a new kind of virtual world. And I think what we're seeing, of course, is that, yes, it is a gaming technology. I played Angry Birds in VR quite recently. That was a lot of fun. But it seems to be becoming even more established, even more important in the professional sector, in business. I visited something called the Open Bridge Lab the other day. That is an open platform for a maritime system for ships, where historically the components have been proprietary and it's been difficult to bring them together. Now they're creating an open platform, and VR is a very important technology they're using for both training and sort of designing the systems. The planning and building sector, that's part of the ministry I'm into, which has been quite slow to digitalize, but where at the moment we're seeing a lot of improvements, a lot of digital projects, both when it comes to visualizing area planning and when it comes to actually seeing how will the buildings be in the terrain before they are actually built, which is a big advantage both for planners and for politicians, because you can much more easily explain to people and discuss what is the best way of doing, of designing the best solutions. So there are a lot of areas. Education, perhaps one of the biggest. Last week I was at a big conference for the university sector here in Norway, in Bergen, where they demonstrated different technologies that can be used for more efficient learning and teaching. One of them was a chemistry application where you could sort of move the molecules and atoms around and actually see what you create in complicated structures in chemistry. But of course, this also means something for how we organize our businesses. Our public sector entities, our municipalities, and even government. As I said, that's my boss, Nikolai Astrup, in January created the post of a Minister of Digitalization, which does not mean that all the areas that have to do with something with technology are moved to one person and out of all the other areas. I mean, it does not mean that the health Minister of Health isn't digital anymore. On the contrary, all the other sectors also need to be more focused on digitalization and need ministers of their own ministers of digitalization. The health sector is in a big transformation where new digital platforms, for example, a new platform for getting access to the data, health data, the data record, so that we can improve healthcare. The transportation sector with autonomous transport modes of transport and better coordination, better resource use. And the picture to the left here is there's a prime minister at the end of the table. The new council she has established with other government minister, the Government Council of Digitalization, that meets 6 times a year now, to get the sort of overview across the board of the different sectors. Some words about what we're doing in the public sector at the moment when it comes to strategies, when it comes to simplifying things and making things more efficient in the public sector across the board. This is R2-D2, you know, from Star Wars, Luke Skywalker. What did R2-D2 do? R2-D2 managed the data that knew Luke Skywalker. There wasn't Google at that time, so R2-D2 had to go to a wall socket and get communication from the network. But R2-D2 managed the data and kept an overview. In R2-D2, Luke Skywalker then didn't have to go into all the different home pages of the public sector entities to find out what do I need now. But technology created a system that made him able to access a virtual assistant. Can we do that in the public sector? Yes, we probably can. Instead of everyone designing their own advanced website with news and so on, how do we bring the most relevant information to the population? We have to, in some areas, simplify and clarify legislation, laws and regulations. We're quite technology neutral in that area, but as some of you might know, in the different sectors, there are some showstoppers sometimes that demand something of the process that isn't as digital friendly as it should be. Or definitions, what the technologists call semantic interoperability, that one way of one word or definition is defined differently in different laws and regulations. Not by coincidence always, but because there was a political will behind, and where it's quite complicated to go into that and standardize. But we have to do that because our digital systems need clear definitions of different areas. We need a better and closer cooperation between the private sector and the public sector, a more innovative procurement process. I mean, the normal way of doing things is quite detailed, defining actually what we're asking for, which has some advantages because it's easier for the market to sort of know what they are competing about. But the future will demand answers that we don't know exactly what are to problems we have defined. So the way forward in some areas, of course, is to try to define the problem we want to solve, and to let loose entrepreneurs, companies, both new small companies and big companies that can compete when it comes to thinking out completely new ways of solving the problems. And that demands of us competence when it comes to procurement, when it comes to how to handle these processes, of course, inside a legal framework where everyone has a level playing field, but where it's also is possible to do something unexpected when it comes to coming up with new solutions. Well, that will be necessary to solve the biggest problems we have. And lastly, but certainly not least, this is also about trust. It's about security. It's about privacy. It's about, I mean, one of the things about the Nordic society that makes us competitive in some of these areas, not necessarily that we put most resources into to research, or most, we are certainly not the biggest countries in the world. But we have a basic trust level that where people both trust each other and trust institutions to a greater degree than many other places. That's a huge advantage when it comes to testing out new solutions, to innovating, to building records where we have data that we can share between different organizations and entities. But it's also a big responsibility to manage that trust, so that we don't do things that lets information that shouldn't be out there to come to people who misuse it. The downside of trust sometimes is that one can become more naive than one should be and doesn't protect oneself to a big enough degree. And certainly with systems, data-driven economy, with data sharing in more advanced ways than we have done previously, demand that we have control over this and can explain exactly what we are doing and what we are not doing. So it's a fantastic challenge we've been given when it comes to moving on in some of these areas. I'm a technology optimist myself, but not in the sense that I believe these things will solve themselves by technology, but where the people, both the competent employees and top-level managers and even politicians together can work to use technologies in new ways we haven't seen before. And I think you're an important part of this. You're in the lead when it comes to VR and creating a network where ideas and people meet each other and make us able to do things we didn't know were possible, perhaps. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'll be around a little bit today and listen to some of the speeches before I have to move on. So thank you very much.